The air in the museum's restricted archive was always cool, smelling of aged paper and distant dust. Elias Vance, a historian who valued empirical fact above all else, was not prepared for the smell of ancient jasmine and blood that suddenly coated the air, nor the voice that purred, smooth as dark silk, directly behind him. "You speak of relics, Mr. Vance, yet you fail to recognize the most compelling relic of all." Elias turned, dropping the centuries-old manuscript. The woman who stood there was not a guard, nor a curator, nor any human he had ever encountered. She was framed by the flickering security lights, yet she cast no true shadow. Her skin was alabaster, her eyes the color of liquid rubies, and the heavy velvet gown she wore whispered of empires long fallen. She was terrifying and impossibly, hypnotically beautiful. How did you get in here?" Elias managed, his rational brain screaming a million alarms his mouth refused to translate. She glided closer, her movements too fluid, too silent. On the crimson of her lips, a slight, almost imperceptible sheen of moisture caught the light. "I walked past the trivialities you call walls and doors. I came for what is mine." She didn't reach for the manuscript. She reached for him. Her cold fingertips brushed his jawline, a touch that felt like being submerged in iced wine. Elias's body locked up, not from fear alone, but from the sudden, overwhelming primal scent of absolute power she exuded. "You," she stated, her voice dropping to a seductive, commanding murmur. "You are not a relic, but you are a rare, beautiful accident." "I don't know who you are," Elias whispered, trying to pull back, but his muscles were frozen. "I am Serafina Vikos, Queen of the Crimson Veil. And you know precisely who I am, Elias. Your history books merely call us myths." She paused, her red eyes boring into his soul. "I have watched you for weeks. You study the artifacts, the legends, the forgotten royal lineages. You possess a keen mind, a sharp wit, and a certain courage." A small, genuine smile touched her lips, a gesture that was more frightening than any snarl. "I overheard your small conversation with your colleague, Dr. Sharma, earlier today." Serafina's thumb traced the vulnerable pulse point in his neck. "You were speaking of the responsibilities of leadership, of partnership, and how the ancient, broken kings needed a strong, rational hand beside them to guide the ages." Elias tried to recall the mundane conversation, a discussion about a Roman emperor and his political spouse. He was utterly horrified that this creature had been listening. "You concluded, quite emphatically," Serafina continued, her voice heavy with anticipation, "that the ideal consort would possess intellect, loyalty, and a complete disregard for the trivial drama of court life." Elias finally found his voice, a shaky, desperate attempt to regain control. "I told her she'd make a perfect wife." He heard himself rasp, the words tumbling out as a desperate, sarcastic challenge to the impossible situation. The vampire queen's smile widened, revealing the exquisite curve of her canines, sharp and delicate as carved glass. The entire archive suddenly felt dark, vast, and eternal. "Then I will be," Serafina Vikos purred, her eyes glowing with absolute triumph. "You have just proposed, Elias Vance. And the queen accepts. Now let us go home." The next thing Elias felt was a blinding, paralyzing cold that wrapped around him like an ancient shroud, followed by the terrifying realization that he wasn't just captured, he was chosen. The rational, structured world he knew dissolved into darkness, and the scent of jasmine, blood, and impending doom was the last thing he registered before the silence took him. He was no longer a historian. He was a groom promised to eternal night. The transition from the cold, familiar archive to the world where Elias Vance now found himself was less a journey and more an instantaneous, jarring displacement. He woke to the taste of copper and the smell of ancient incense, lying on a massive bed draped in midnight blue velvet. The room itself was vast, illuminated by tall, narrow windows that showed not the bustling city streets, but a distant, starless night sky filtered through what looked like perpetually swirling fog. He sat up, his head throbbing. His clothes, the tweed jacket and sensible trousers of a museum curator, felt ridiculously out of place. He was in a castle, but this was no dusty, preserved ruin. This was living stone, pulsating with a cold, intimidating energy. Every surface, from the polished black marble floor to the carved mahogany pillars, seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Ah, the human has finally decided to join the waking world," a voice drawled from the shadows in the corner of the room. Elias squinted. Standing guard near the door was a tall, severe-looking man in attire that looked part military, part royal court. A black tunic laced with silver thread, standing perfectly still. His eyes were not red, but a pale, unforgiving gold. "Where am I?" Elias demanded, trying to sound authoritative and failing to mask the tremor in his voice. "And where is Serafina?" The man gave a dry, humorless smile. "You are in the Sanctum Vikos, the oldest house beneath the crimson veil. And you will refer to our queen with the respect her rank demands, human. Her Majesty is occupied with matters more pressing than ensuring the comfort of her new pet. Elias started to swing his legs off the bed, but the man stepped forward, his movement terrifyingly swift, blocking the path. I am Lord Kale, second commander of the Coven. And if you attempt to wander, your curiosity will be answered with pain, not knowledge. You are here because the Queen decrees it. Nothing more. Elias realized Kale wasn't just a guard, he was a hostile sentinel. His presence radiated a simmering hatred that bypassed fear and went straight to Elias's survival instinct. This was not a prison, it was a cage, and Kale wanted him out of it, permanently. She called me her husband, Elias challenged, leaning into the supposed protection of the title. Kale let out a low, guttural laugh. She called you a prospect. A necessary inconvenience. The ancient prophecy demands a human of specific qualities to finalize the Queen's consolidation of the houses. You fit the physical criteria. Your intellect she finds amusing. But husband? You are a vessel, Vance. And I, for one, hope you prove unworthy. The threat was clear. Lord Kale was a traditionalist, and Elias was an unwelcome anomaly. A heavy wooden door on the opposite wall swung open, interrupting the tense exchange. Serafina stood there, no longer in the heavy velvet of the archives, but in a dress of dark emerald that seemed to shimmer with internal light. She was breathtaking and utterly dangerous. Kale, she said, her voice mild, but the tone of dismissal was absolute. Step away from my property. Lord Kale immediately bowed, a rigid, deep movement of reluctant obedience. As you command, my queen. He backed away from the doorway and stood silently by the wall. Serafina approached Elias, her rubine eyes glittering with a predatory amusement that softened only slightly when she reached the edge of the bed. Forgive Kale's lack of manners, Elias, she said, her hand reaching out, not to comfort but to command. She gently stroked his cheek, her fingers cool against his sudden fever. He is old. His worldview is small. He doesn't understand the necessary beauty of a strong alliance. Alliance? Elias pulled away from her touch, forcing himself to stand. The room swam for a moment, and he had to steady himself against the bedpost. You kidnapped me. You threatened my colleague. This isn't an alliance, it's captivity. Such strong words for a fragile little human, Serafina murmured, tilting her head. But yes, it is captivity. For now. An alliance requires trust, and trust must be earned. From both sides. Sit down, Elias. We have much to discuss before your presentation to the court. Elias refused to sit. He stood his ground, demanding answers. What presentation? What prophecy? I am a historian, not a participant in whatever ancient delusion you and your court are running. Serafina moved around him, circling him like a predator assessing its prize. You are more than a historian, Elias. You are the key to my future reign. And the fate of this world, the human one you cherish so much, rests on the success of our union. She stopped in front of him, closing the distance until their breaths mingled, hers cool, minty, and strange, his ragged and fast. You see, she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, the coven of the Crimson Veil has splintered. My ancestors, in their vanity, divided our power into 4 great houses across the continents. For centuries, we have been weakened by their petty squabbles. Now only I remain strong enough to reunite them. And what does a historian from London have to do with your vampire politics? Elias asked incredulously. Serafina smiled, that dangerous, fascinating smile. The prophecy, recorded in the very text you were studying, states that the true queen must take a human consort, one whose bloodline carries the specific, long-forgotten mark of the witness, to bind the houses under one banner eternally. It is a symbolic act, a blending of the mortal and the immortal, establishing a dynasty beyond reproach. She trailed a fingernail down his lapel. I scanned thousands of bloodlines. Yours, Elias, is the last. You carry the mark. You are literally the missing piece of my crown. Your intelligence, your rationality, these are merely pleasant bonuses. Elias felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The rational world he had clung to was shattered. He wasn't dealing with delusion. He was dealing with the terrifying, literal truth of myth. He was a pawn in an immortal political game. And if I refuse? He challenged. Serafina's expression became instantly colder, devoid of all warmth. If you refuse, Elias, I will ensure that Lord Kale and others like him have the pleasure of tearing your world apart to find another suitable candidate. And that, I assure you, will involve a great deal of human suffering. You are the easy choice. The only safe choice. She stepped back, retrieving a heavy, ornate cloak from a nearby stand. Tonight, you will be presented to the core coven. You will stand by my side. You will look regal. And you will not, under any circumstances, show fear. Do this and you live. Do this well and you live comfortably. Serafina placed a heavy gold signet ring on his finger, ignoring his protest. Consider this your first piece of armor. Now prepare yourself. We descend into the darkness. With that, she turned and walked through the door she had entered, leaving Elias alone with the silent, judgmental presence of Lord Kale, realizing his captivity was not about chains, but about a terrifying, deadly form of forced marriage to save the very world he had lost. The descent was long and chilling, leading deeper into the castle's foundation. Serafina led Elias down a spiral staircase carved into ancient bedrock. The only light came from flickering gas lamps held by motionless statues, casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock the concept of reality. Elias, clad now in borrowed fine black silks that felt alien on his skin, walked stiffly beside the queen. He felt every stare from the occasional guards they passed, vampires whose eyes followed his every move with unconcealed suspicion and disdain. "Control your expression, Elias," Serafina murmured, her voice barely audible over the stone echo. "You look like a lamb being led to slaughter. Confidence is a better shield than courage here." "I am neither confident nor courageous," Elias retorted quietly. "I am a rational man facing the absurd. And you have me walking into a room full of your rivals, wearing the clothes of a courtier." "Exactly," Serafina said, a flicker of approval in her eyes. "They expect me to drag a terrified prisoner. Give them a smug, composed prospective king consort instead. It throws them off balance. You want me to act smug? It's not acting if you believe it," she purred, stopping at a massive double-doored archway guarded by two imposing, silent vampire sentinels. "Remember, Elias, you are my choice. That makes you important. That makes you dangerous." She placed her hand on the small of his back, a proprietary touch that sent a jolt of cold awareness through him. The doors swung inward with a low, grinding sound of stone against stone, revealing the Hall of Whispers. The room was vast, an underground amphitheater. Hundreds of figures stood or sat in tiered balconies, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. This was the Coven of the Crimson Veil. The air was thick with power, tradition, and hostile curiosity. Elias felt the collective force of their ancient gazes hit him like a physical wave. He clung to the single, stabilizing thought: these are not myths. They are political entities. They can be analyzed. Serafina led him towards a dais at the center of the hall. The moment they stepped into the main chamber, the low hum of conversation stopped completely. "My lords and ladies," Serafina announced, her voice resonating powerfully through the hall, carrying the weight of centuries. "I present to you Elias Vance." A collective murmur swept through the crowd, quickly silenced by a single sharp glance from the queen. Elias could hear whispers of human? And the mark. And then, louder, more venomous, an insult. Lord Kale stepped forward from the shadows near the dais, his face a mask of restrained fury. "My queen," Kale's voice was smooth but laced with poison. "You bring a mortal to the sanctum and present him as your intended consort? This is a desecration of the ancient law." Serafina turned to Kale, her posture radiating controlled, lethal calm. "The ancient law states, the unifying queen shall find her heart's counter, a mortal marked by the witness's blood, to cement the dynasty. The law does not specify the form of his arrival, Lord Kale. It demands purity, loyalty. Not some unsuspecting historian snatched from a museum." Kale challenged, his voice rising. Serafina merely smiled, a terrifyingly serene expression. "Elias, tell Lord Kale what you were studying when I found you." Elias took a deep breath. His historian training kicked in, the comfort of fact overriding the terror of the audience. He looked directly at Kale. "I was studying the decline of the Valerius Coven during the late Roman period," Elias said clearly. "Specifically, the historical anomaly of Queen Livia's rapid consolidation of power following the ritual of the sunken scepter." The reference instantly sobered the room. Queen Livia was a figure revered and feared in vampire lore for her ruthlessness and success. "And what did you conclude about Queen Livia's success?" Serafina prompted. "She succeeded because her court was complacent," Elias stated, his voice gaining strength. "She was surrounded by zealots obsessed with ancient blood rites, which made them blind to modern, mundane threats. She used her human spouse, who managed her external resources, to systematically starve her rivals of influence before destroying them. She was patient. They were arrogant." A palpable tension settled over the hall. Elias had just given a lecture on how to defeat a powerful vampire court, using their own history against them. He had called them arrogant and predictable. Serafina placed her hand firmly on Elias's shoulder. "My future consort is not simply a symbol, Kale. He is my external asset. He reminds us that while we live in eternal darkness, we must still understand the rising sun. My dynasty will not fall to complacency. Kale's golden eyes narrowed, but he was cornered. Elias had used knowledge, not strength, to win the point, and Seraphina had solidified his role as a necessary tactical mind. If the mortal is so wise, Kale sneered, recovering quickly, let him prove his commitment. The traditional challenge must be met, Queen. The test of the blood oath. Elias felt Seraphina's grip tighten painfully on his shoulder. This was the moment she had feared. The test is not necessary, Seraphina dismissed instantly. It is required for any non-blood entry into the sanctum's direct circle, Kale insisted, appealing to the assembly. A chorus of agreement rose from the older vampires. He must prove he can survive the true nature of our existence, Queen. He must drink the essence of the veil. Seraphina sighed, a sound of regal impatience. The test of the blood oath, she whispered to Elias, her lips barely moving, involves consuming a highly concentrated form of our oldest elixir. It's safe for us. For a human, it can mean immediate, catastrophic organ failure, or lifelong mental deterioration. It is designed to kill mortals. Elias looked at Seraphina. She was worried, but her resolve was unshakable. He knew that refusing would be viewed as weakness and would give Kale the victory he needed to discredit him entirely. He looked back at Kale, taking a risky leap of faith. I accept the challenge, Elias said clearly, surprising even Seraphina. Kale's face twisted into a triumphant sneer. He clapped his hands once, sharply. Instantly, a small silver goblet was brought forward, filled with a viscous, dark liquid that glowed faintly. It looked less like a drink and more like concentrated night. Drink, historian, Kale commanded, holding the goblet out. And prove you are worthy of the eternal night. Elias took the goblet. It was ice cold. He looked one last time at Seraphina. Her eyes warned him of the fatal risk. But he saw something else there, a flicker of genuine respect for his reckless courage. He raised the goblet to his lips, ignoring the stench of iron and deep earth. If he was to survive this castle, he couldn't just rely on Seraphina's protection. He had to earn the respect of her enemies, or at least their apprehension. Elias drank it all in one long, agonizing gulp. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. It was not a burning sensation but an internal freeze. His veins felt like they were filling with liquid nitrogen. His vision blurred and a piercing, high-pitched noise screamed in his ears, blocking out the silence of the waiting court. He swayed, clutching the empty goblet, fighting the sudden, desperate urge to vomit. Then just as quickly the pain retreated, replaced by a terrifying hyper-awareness. He could hear every breath in the hall, smell the faint musk of ancient leather on Kale's tunic, and see the minuscule cracks in the marble floor miles away. He felt alive but terribly, painfully exposed. He met Kale's gaze, dropped the goblet with a loud, clattering ring, and forced a slight, challenging smile onto his trembling lips. Is that all, Lord Kale? Elias managed, his voice sounding distant and strained but steady. Kale stared at him, his face registering a mixture of shock and extreme annoyance. The human should have collapsed, convulsed, or died. Seraphina stepped forward, her hand moving from Elias's shoulder to his arm, pulling him possessively to her side. The consort has been tested, she announced to the silent hall, her eyes flashing a warning. He has passed. The matter is settled. With that, she ushered Elias off the dais, leaving the bewildered court to process the unexpected resilience of the historian. Elias, barely holding on to consciousness, knew he had survived the first test, but the elixir was still burning cold in his blood, promising future horrors. He was indebted to Seraphina now, having survived a trap set by her loyalists, and the stakes of their partnership had just been raised to mortal levels. The sudden hyper-awareness that the blood oath elixir had gifted Elias did not fade with the light. It intensified. Back in his lavish chamber, the castle was anything but silent. He could hear the faint scuttling of ancient stone mites in the walls, the distant rhythmic drip of water deep in the catacombs, and the low, constant hum of the thousands of lives that populated the coven below. Sleep was impossible. Every sensation was amplified, every nerve ending screaming. He found Seraphina in the adjoining study, a room filled with scrolls, globes, and books bound in materials that looked suspiciously like human skin. She was leaning over a massive map, tracing lines with a finger tipped with a nail sharp as obsidian. The elixir stabilizes eventually, Seraphina said, not looking up. Or it kills you. Since you're still standing, it's the former. Consider it a necessary upgrade. The consort cannot be weak. Upgrade? Elias pressed his temples, trying to shut out the sound of his own blood rushing. I can hear the thoughts of the guards 3 halls away. They are discussing how best to dispose of my body. Seraphina finally looked at him, her ruby eyes holding a cold amusement. Excellent. Now you know the value of silence. That's the first lesson. Vampires do not lie, Elias. They simply choose not to speak. You will learn to do the same. She gestured towards the map. This is the current state of my kingdom. The blue areas are loyal. The red are the rival houses, Valerius and Noctis, who wish to see me deposed. Lord Kale is the voice of the old ways, loyal to me, but despising the means I use to secure my reign. He doesn't hate you. He hates the prophecy that makes you necessary. Elias walked closer to the map, momentarily distracted from his physical discomfort by the geopolitical strategy laid out before him. The Valerius Coven. I was studying their decline. They were too slow to adapt to gunpowder and nationalism. If they still exist, they must be equally rigid. They are, Seraphina confirmed, a sharp smile touching her lips. They believe that pure blood is absolute power. I believe power is absolute power, regardless of its source. You, Elias, are my disruption. My disruption comes at the cost of my sanity, Elias countered. What happens when the elixir wears off? It doesn't, she explained simply. It has rewritten a small part of your physical reality. You are now attuned to our environment. You will see things humans cannot, hear things they dismiss. It's what gives the mark of the witness its power. You will learn to manage it or you will break. I prefer the former. Elias realized his predicament was worse than he thought. He wasn't just marrying a queen. He was becoming a part of her supernatural apparatus. And how do I manage it? Seraphina stood fully, her emerald dress rustling faintly. She approached him, and this time her touch was different, not possessive but instructional. She placed her hands on his shoulders, guiding him to face her fully. Focus, Elias. Do not let the sound define the space. Define the silence. Her eyes were mesmerizing, a vortex of red, drawing his concentration away from the overwhelming noise of the world. Breathe. Not with your lungs but with your mind. Find the empty space between the beats of your heart. She was teaching him a form of vampire meditation, a way to filter the noise of eternal life. For a moment, the chaotic cacophony lessened. The sound of Kale's boots pacing 3 floors above became just a faint rhythm, instead of an invasive roar. Good, she praised, her voice a low vibration that seemed to calm the frantic synapses in his brain. You adapt quickly. This is why I chose you. You are pliable yet strong. Like wrought iron. The proximity, the instruction, the shared moment of vulnerability, it was intensely intimate. Seraphina was not a woman, she was a force of nature, but in this room she was treating him as a partner, not a pawn. The attraction he had suppressed in the archive surged back, cold and undeniable. He found himself looking not at the queen, but at the face of his beautiful captor. You speak of partnership, Elias said, his voice husky. But every move I make is under surveillance. Every breath is judged. What kind of partnership is this? An honest one, she replied, her eyes never leaving his. We are both beings of calculation, Elias. You crave knowledge, I crave dominion. I need your mind to navigate the mortal world I must eventually control. You need my power to survive the immortal world you've been dragged into. She leaned in, her breath cold against his ear. And as for the physical element of partnership, it will come. We are not bound by mortal constraints of hurried passion. We have eternity to explore the nature of our arrangement. When you are truly ready to accept the veil, I will be ready to accept your submission. The word, submission, was a cold shock, a reminder of the true dynamic. Submission? Elias repeated, pulling back slightly. You offered yourself as my husband, Seraphina stated matter-of-factly. The husband to a queen accepts her rule. Anything less is treason. She turned back to the map, the moment of intimacy abruptly over. For now your tasks are simple. Learn the layout of the sanctum. Observe the coven members. And most importantly, learn how to manage the mark. You will accompany me to the Grand Council meeting tomorrow night. Lord Kale will certainly have arranged another accident for you. Elias realized his life was now a constant test. He was not just surviving Kale. He was surviving Seraphina, who was deliberately pushing him to the edge of his endurance to forge him into the consort she needed. He looked at the magnificent, terrible woman who claimed him. The fear was still there, but beneath it, a strange, dangerous excitement had begun to take root. He was in the heart of the myth, and his rational mind, the very thing she valued, was his only weapon. He had promised her she would make a perfect wife. Now he needed to learn the rules of her perfect, terrifying marriage. The days that followed were a blur of intense sensory overload and mandatory court appearances. Elias learned quickly that the true danger in the Sanctum Vicos was not the fangs, but the whispers. His hyperhearing, a curse only a few days prior, was rapidly becoming his most crucial tool. He started recognizing the distinct emotional signatures of the prominent coven members. The cool disdain of Lord Kale, the sycophantic greed of Lady Isolde, and the nervous calculation of the lesser nobles. Serafina continued her unique form of mentorship. She treated him less like a lover and more like a necessary political tool, demanding precision, obedience, and total psychological resilience. During one late afternoon session in the massive echoing library, she tested his memory by making him recount the history and alliances of 3 rival coven houses based only on a single encrypted scroll. Valerius is brittle, bound by ancient ritual, Elias summarized, tapping the corner of the scroll. Their strength is their blood purity, which is also their greatest vulnerability. Noctis is fragmented and impulsive, driven by localized territorial skirmishes. They hate the Veil but have no central leadership. And the 4th, the one everyone forgets? Serafina tested, leaning back on a stone gargoyle carving with casual grace. The Obsidian clan, Elias said immediately. They are not part of the Veil, the Valerius, or Noctis. They are reclusive mercenaries, only appearing when power shifts drastically. They will only align with a victor. Serafina smiled, a rare, genuine expression of appreciation. You see the chessboard, Elias, not just the pieces. This is why you are still breathing. Or perhaps, Elias countered, adjusting the borrowed silk jacket that still felt like a costume. Lord Kale is simply waiting for the Grand Council meeting to enact his next move. Serafina's smile vanished. Yes, and he will be careful. He cannot directly challenge my choice without violating tradition, but he can expose a weakness. He knows the mark is your strength, but he also knows the human mind is your weakness. The next night, the entire coven gathered in the Hall of Whispers for the Grand Council. This time, Elias felt less terrified and more intensely focused. He walked beside Serafina with a calculated swagger, projecting the confidence she demanded. The meeting proceeded with the predictable flow of vampire politics. Reports of waning influence in the mortal world, debates over territory, and subtle jabs at Serafina's progressive leadership. Elias remained silent, analyzing the seating arrangement. Kale was placed strategically near a pillar, conferring with Lady Isolde, the greedy noble Elias had identified. My queen, Lord Kale finally interjected, rising smoothly after the territorial reports concluded. The coven is concerned about the security risk posed by a mortal holding knowledge of our sanctum. Furthermore, the required blood consummation ceremony is fast approaching. We must ensure the consort is not only physically capable but mentally sound for the binding. Serafina's eyes narrowed slightly. His mental fortitude was proven during the oath, Kale. With respect, Queen, the elixir causes high sensitivity. It is known to lead to delusion in humans, Kale pressed, his gold eyes resting on Elias with barely veiled malice. Therefore, I propose a test of the truth of reflection. A murmur of apprehension swept the room. Elias recognized the name. The truth of reflection was an ancient, psychological vampire rite, meant to force the subject to confront their deepest, most destructive fear or regret, often leaving them catatonic. The reflection is a dangerous rite, Kale. It is not necessary, Serafina insisted, her voice growing dangerously cold. It is required by the charter for a consort of the witness's mark, Kale lied, pushing the edge of the tradition. He then turned to Elias. The human fears something, Queen. Let him prove he can confront it and return whole. Or is he truly broken beneath that smug exterior? Elias felt Serafina's tension beside him. She was caught. If she refused, Kale would successfully paint Elias as weak and unstable, jeopardizing the unification. He had to accept. Elias stepped forward, meeting Kale's gaze. I accept the reflection. But if I pass, Lord Kale, you will publicly swear an oath of absolute obedience to the Queen's choice of consort, meaning me for one full cycle. Kale hesitated, surprised by the audacity of the mortal's counter-demand. He clearly hadn't expected Elias to use his historical knowledge to extract a political price. Kale ultimately sneered, agreed. Your hubris will be your undoing. The test began instantly. Kale produced a small, intricately carved silver mirror. As Kale held it up, Elias saw not his own reflection, but a swirling, distorted image of his past. The elixir in his veins, amplified by the ritual, dragged him into his own mind. He was suddenly back in his old life, but twisted. He was standing over Dr. Lena Sharma, his best friend and colleague in the museum archive. Her eyes were wide with terror, and his hands were gripping her throat. You were too late, Elias, a voice that sounded exactly like his own whispered from the spectral reflection. You should have seen the signs. You let the rational blind you. She is gone because you valued books over people. Elias watched the reflected image of his hands tighten around Lena's neck, a perfect visualization of his greatest, buried fear, that his detached, analytical nature made him unable to protect the people he cared about. The illusion was horrifyingly real. He felt the phantom pressure, the regret, the guilt. The image blurred further, morphing from Lena to his own parents, whose health he had ignored in favor of chasing obscure historical facts. This is a lie. This is a tactic, Elias screamed internally, fighting the powerful psychological grip. My regret is real, but this action is false. Cale is exploiting the consequence, not the crime. He focused on the single constant, Serafina. He could feel her power, cold and steady, just outside the terrifying loop of his mind. He focused not on the fear of loss, but on the practical reality of Serafina's castle. The greatest danger is not the fear itself, Elias realized with a sudden, chilling clarity. It is allowing the fear to control the present. He fixed his gaze on the illusory, panicked face of Lena and said out loud, his voice ringing through the silent hall, I failed my duties in the past. But failure is not destiny. If I am to save the world you and Serafina are fighting over, I cannot be consumed by what was. I must focus on what is. The image of Lena shattered like glass. The mirror went dark. Elias swayed, sweat pouring down his face, but he was standing. He had passed. He had confronted his deepest psychological flaw, his detachment, and used his rationale to break the illusion. Lord Cale's jaw was tight with shock and fury. Serafina, who had been watching with an intense, unreadable expression, let out a slow, satisfied breath. The consort returns unbroken, Serafina announced, her voice filled with triumph. Lord Cale, your oath. Cale, trapped by tradition and his own challenge, had no choice. He sank to one knee before Elias and Serafina, his face contorted in humiliation. I swear absolute obedience to the Queen's choice of consort for one full cycle. Elias had won a major political victory. He had not only survived the trap but had neutralized his most dangerous direct threat, securing a temporary ally, or at least a constrained enemy, in the process. Later that night, back in their chamber, Elias was exhausted, the lingering trauma of the reflection weighing heavily on him. He sat by the hearth, nursing a goblet of Serafina's potent, spiced wine. Serafina approached him, her movements unusually soft. She knelt beside his chair. You handled Cale beautifully, she murmured, her red eyes softer than he had ever seen them. You are more dangerous than I estimated. I used your knowledge against your enemies, Elias said, still recovering. My fear is that I can analyze everything, yet feel nothing. That's what Cale tried to use. Serafina reached out and gently cupped his jaw. Her touch was cold, comforting, and intensely focused. That detachment, Elias, is not a flaw here. It is what separates you from them. It is what prevents me from simply turning you into one of us. She leaned in, her gaze dropping to his mouth. You are not just my consort, Elias. You are my last human anchor to strategy, to logic, and to the world I must protect by conquering it. She pressed her cold lips against his, a sudden, deliberate kiss that tasted of iron, jasmine, and ancient power. It was a kiss of ownership, of shared danger, and of gratitude. When she drew back, her eyes were burning with a need that went beyond politics. You won us time, Elias. Now we use it to solidify our union. The brief, charged intimacy with Serafina had cracked open a complex new dynamic in their relationship. It wasn't love in the mortal sense. It was a blend of respect, necessity, and a terrifying shared ambition. Elias found himself analyzing her not just as a queen or a captor, but as a dangerous partner whose vulnerabilities, though few, were critical to his own survival. Serafina, in turn, began to rely on his human perspective, often consulting him on the logistics of managing mortal assets, a task far below the notice of any vampire noble, yet crucial for the Coven's survival. Lord Cale, bound by his forced oath, became a cold, passive presence. He was forced to accompany Elias on his sanctioned studies within the Coven's massive library, offering grudging assistance on ancient texts, his resentment a constant, audible hum in Elias's enhanced senses. One evening, while Elias was poring over texts detailing the blood consummation ceremony, the final irreversible ritual of their union, Cale finally spoke, his voice low and devoid of emotion. You should study the small print, historian, Cale said, pointing a sharp finger at a section of the scroll detailing the risks. The ritual is not just symbolic. It transfers a portion of the Queen's immortal anchor to the consort. It makes you indispensable, yes, but also a living target. Elias frowned. A living target for whom? The Valerius Coven, Cale supplied, closing the text sharply. They believe that the blending of human and pure blood is an abomination. They will not allow the ceremony to be completed. They see you as the single weak link in Serafina's armor. This information was crucial. It wasn't just about court politics anymore, it was an external war. Why tell me this, Cale? You hate me, Elias challenged. I do not value you, human, Cale admitted, his gold eyes fixed on Elias. but I value the veil. Serafina's weakness is her stubborn pride. If she falls, the Valerius will seize control, and their antiquated rules will destroy all we have built. Your continued existence, however irritating, is currently necessary for the survival of the Coven. Now study the weaknesses of the Valerius's main fortress, the Ethereum. Elias realized Kale wasn't his friend, but he was now a self-interested informant. Elias spent the next 2 days utilizing the castle's massive historical resources, focusing entirely on the Valerius. He discovered that the Valerius Coven, led by the ruthless Elder Volkov, operated from an ancient, secluded fortress in Eastern Europe. They relied heavily on powerful, non-vampiric magical defenses, specifically solar guardians, mortals bonded to sunlight magic, used to prevent any night creature from approaching the Ethereum in the daytime. He immediately took his findings to Serafina, who was preparing for a crucial communication link with the Noctis Coven, a potential unstable ally. Volkov is planning an offensive, Elias stated, laying out a schematic he'd drawn of the Ethereum's defenses. He won't attack the sanctum directly. He knows we are too well defended. He will attack the consummation ceremony itself. Serafina paused her work, her intense focus shifting entirely to Elias. The ceremony is hidden. Only the inner circle knows the time and location. The inner circle includes Kale, and Kale only told me this now because he knows Volkov will target the ritual site, Elias reasoned. Volkov isn't interested in destroying you. He's interested in destroying the prophecy. Killing me, the marked consort, renders the entire unification effort moot and throws the veil into chaos. And the Solar Guardians? Serafina asked, her voice dangerously quiet. They are their unique defense, Elias explained. Volkov will use them to secure the area, making it impossible for your vampire forces to intervene, leaving only the two of us exposed during the most vulnerable part of the ritual. Serafina moved swiftly, crossing the room in 2 silent strides. She grasped Elias's hands, her eyes searching his face. You have given me knowledge that could save my reign, Elias, she said, her voice laced with admiration and a cold gratitude. What is your price for this loyalty? Elias looked back at the queen, the beautiful, terrifying creature who had captured his world. He didn't want freedom anymore. He wanted power and a partnership that defied death. I want no more secrets regarding my safety, Elias stated firmly. If I am to be your anchor, I need full access to the tactical information. And I want to be part of the decision-making process for the defense of the ritual site. I know mortal warfare better than anyone here. Serafina smiled, a slow, predatory curve of her lips. Agreed. Your wish is granted, consort. We will use your mortal genius against the ancient world. Kale will assist you. You two will plan the counteroffense. Over the next few days, an unlikely, tense collaboration formed between Elias and Lord Kale. In the subterranean strategy rooms, the historian and the vampire warrior debated tactics. Kale possessed centuries of military knowledge. Elias brought the practicality of modern strategy, logistics, and mortal psychology. We cannot kill the Solar Guardians before the ceremony, Kale argued, pointing to a vulnerability in the map. They are consecrated. Their death creates a massive wave of residual sunlight energy that would kill Serafina. Then we neutralize them, Elias replied, tapping the area. They are mortals reliant on a power source. If we can disrupt the flow of consecrated power, not the body, they become useless shields. I need to know the exact source of the Valerius's consecration ritual. Kale, seeing the cold, analytical brilliance of the human, begrudgingly provided the necessary, obscure details. Elias realized the truth. The ancient world had weaknesses that only a detached, rational mind could exploit. He was no longer just surviving, he was fighting. The date for the blood consummation ceremony was set. The venue, a hidden ruined chapel atop the highest mountain peak outside the sanctum, a place traditionally resistant to vampire magic, requiring them to rely entirely on Serafina's own power, which would be compromised during the ritual. It was a perfect trap laid by tradition. As the ceremony approached, Elias felt a strange, dual transformation. The elixir had integrated, giving him perfect control over his enhanced senses. He was mentally sharper, physically more resilient. Yet, the human part of him, the man who valued compassion and empirical truth, was being steadily worn away by the cold calculus of immortal power. On the night before the ritual, Serafina entered his chamber, dressed in a simple, flowing black robe. She was serene, yet carried the weight of her eternal crown. Tomorrow, Elias, you will either become my king consort forever, or we will both die, she stated simply. I trust your plan to counter Volkov's guards. But I need to know one thing. Do you do this for my power or for the world we are trying to save? Elias looked at her, at the woman who had stripped him of his old life and given him a terrible, fascinating new one. I do it for the knowledge, Elias confessed, his voice steady. To see what happens when the perfect historical anomaly, us, meets inevitable conflict. And I do it because in this terrifying world, you are the only constant. She gave him a rare, genuine smile, tinged with sadness. Then, my consort, let us prepare to survive forever or die gloriously. She spent the rest of the night with him, a quiet, protective presence. The calm before the inevitable violent storm. The night of the blood consummation ceremony was unnaturally clear, the moon a sliver of cold steel high above the mountain peak. Elias and Serafina stood at the center of the ruined chapel, its ancient, weather-beaten stones forming a natural amphitheater. The wind howled around them, carrying the scent of pine and the metallic tang of impending conflict. Serafina was magnificent, clad in a ceremonial gown of deep burgundy velvet and heavy silver, her crown catching the faint moonlight. Elias wore simple black, the mark of the witness, a faintly glowing spiral, visible on his wrist beneath the heavy cuff. Lord Kale and a dozen elite guards stood in a loose perimeter, their attention fixed on the surrounding peaks, not on the ceremony itself. The ritual demands absolute focus, Elias, Serafina whispered, her voice tight with tension. It will drain my power and leave me vulnerable. If Volkov strikes, you must execute your plan immediately. I know the plan, Elias confirmed, his hand gripping the cold hilt of a ceremonial dagger Serafina had insisted he carry. His mind was razor-sharp, the elixir-induced awareness processing the air pressure, the wind speed, and the faint rhythmic pulse of energy coming from the eastern ridge. The ritual began. Serafina started chanting in a language that sounded older than stone, a deep, resonating hum that vibrated the very air. As she chanted, a swirling vortex of crimson mist began to form around them, illuminated by a single suspended vial containing a drop of her purest blood. As the chant peaked, Serafina's strength visibly faltered. She reached out, her face pale, and touched Elias's chest. The goal was to bind her immortal anchor to his mortal soul. It was precisely at that moment of supreme vulnerability that the attack began. From the eastern ridge, 4 powerful beams of blinding white light shot across the peak, not aimed at Serafina, but directly at the swirling crimson mist. The impact was shattering. The mist recoiled, screaming as if burned. Solar Guardians. Kale roared, drawing his sword. Volkov has sent his consecrated assassins. The light beams solidified into 4 figures standing on the ridge, mortals encased in armor that glowed with trapped sunlight. These were the Solar Guardians, their consecrated power a lethal deterrent to any creature of the night. Kale and his vampire guards were instantly paralyzed by the light, shielding their eyes in agony. Elias was the only one unaffected by the light, thanks to the inherent resistance granted by the mark of the witness. He was now alone, facing 4 superhuman sun-powered soldiers, while Serafina slumped, momentarily incapacitated by the ritual's interruption and the sunlight's sudden exposure. Elder Volkov, a massive ancient vampire clad in battle-scarred plate, stepped out from behind the guardians. Serafina, you seek to taint the pure bloodline with this human filth. I will destroy the consort, and your fragmented reign will end. Volkov. Elias shouted, stepping in front of the kneeling Serafina, using his small human body as a defiant shield. Your zealotry is the weakness. You rely on archaic power that can be neutralized. Elias didn't wait for a reply. He focused entirely on the source of the Guardian's power, the rhythmic humming energy he had detected earlier. Following Kale's grudging information, Elias knew the Guardians were connected to a central consecrated artifact hidden somewhere nearby. Kale now. Elias commanded, knowing Kale was bound by his oath to listen. The east perimeter. 30 paces, look for the carved rock formation. The attack snapped Kale out of his sun-induced paralysis just long enough to hear the command. Bound by his oath, he roared, ignoring the light, and vanished into the darkness toward the eastern ridge. Meanwhile, Volkov ordered his assassins. Destroy the human. 2 Solar Guardians advanced, moving with terrifying speed, their blades glowing with pure light. Elias dodged the first sweeping blow, the heat of the blade searing his cheek. He was outmatched in speed and strength. Neutralize the power, not the body, Elias repeated the mantra. As the second Guardian attacked, Elias lunged low, not at the Guardian but at a specific patch of ground Volkov had just stepped over, a depression in the stone that looked like a natural basin. Elias plunged his ceremonial dagger into the earth there, severing a barely visible hair-thin line of silvery root Kale had pointed out as the Guardian's terrestrial power conduit. The moment the root was cut, the 2 closest Guardians screamed in pain. Their glowing armor sputtered, and the intense light surrounding them dimmed drastically. They were still strong, but their consecrated protection was gone. Their terrestrial link is severed. Elias yelled at Kale's retreating form. Go for the central anchor. Volkov, enraged, charged Elias himself. You pathetic mortal. You have ruined everything. Serafina stirred, her eyes flashing dangerously. Touch him, Volkov, and I will tear your soul from your body. The Queen's threat gave Elias the window he needed. He focused his hyper-awareness. The remaining two Guardians, their power still intact, were fixed on protecting Volkov, who was focused on Elias. Just as Volkov swung his massive, archaic broadsword, Kale returned from the eastern ridge. He held high a small, crystalline lantern, the Guardian's central power anchor. He threw the lantern with superhuman force directly at Volkov's head. The lantern shattered. Instead of light, a massive, instantaneous surge of darkness magic, Serafina's own residual power stored in the area, erupted from the broken crystal. The blast neutralized all remaining consecrated light. The four Solar Guardians collapsed instantly, their armor turning to cold, inert metal. Elder Volkov, unprotected, reeled back, scorched by the darkness blast. Serafina, seeing her opening, rose in a surge of renewed, terrifying power. You dared interrupt the veil, Volkov. She did not rely on her strength, she relied on the terror of her ancient magic. She unleashed a psychic wave that tore into Volkov's mind, showing him not just pain, but the utter futility of his antiquated resistance. Volkov, defeated and mentally shattered, sank to his knees. We do not kill rivals, Elias, Serafina said, standing victorious over the elder. We break them and put them to use. She spared Volkov, publicly stripping him of his title and placing him under the temporary command of Lord Kale, a double humiliation Kale accepted with cold satisfaction. The immediate crisis was over. The Coven had witnessed Elias, the human consort, save their queen and their unity by using superior intellect to defeat brute force and ancient magic. Elias walked back to the dais, exhausted but exhilarated. The ritual, though interrupted, needed to be completed. Serafina, now radiating absolute power, held the vial of blood, which glowed brighter than before. You risked everything, Serafina whispered, pulling him close. You survived the sun, the sword, and the mind game. You have proven yourself worthy of eternity. She took the small vial and poured the blood onto his mark of the witness. As the blood touched his skin, it didn't burn or absorb, it merged, sealing the ancient bond. A blinding flash of crimson light erupted from Elias's wrist, and he felt a cold, comforting power settle deep into his soul. The immortal anchor was complete. Serafina leaned back, her victory total. She looked at Elias, no longer just a mortal, but her bound counterpart. You are now king consort, Elias Vance, she stated for all the witnessing nobles to hear. And you will never leave my side. The completion of the blood consummation ceremony was not the end of the conflict, but the true beginning of Elias Vance's eternal struggle. The immortal anchor Serafina had bound to his soul gave him more than just resistance to sunlight. It granted him a form of minor invulnerability and, crucially, a deeper, almost psychic link to Serafina herself. He could sense her mood, her power fluctuations, and sometimes the faintest flicker of her ancient thoughts. Elias was no longer a historian or a captive. He was the king consort, and the Coven, though resentful, bowed before his new status. Lord Kale, true to his oath, became Elias's fiercely protective shadow, a cold reassurance that external enemies like Volkov, now imprisoned, would remain neutralized. The change in his relationship with Serafina was profound. Their partnership shifted from forced necessity to a formidable, if calculating, intimacy. She now consulted him on everything, valuing his detached, mortal perspective on governance. She treated him with a cold reverence, recognizing that his human insight was her greatest strategic asset. Yet, every shared moment, every touch, was a chilling reminder of the eternal contract they had signed. The Obsidian clan has sent observers, Serafina informed him one evening in the strategy room, where Elias now spent most of his time. They see the stability our unification has brought. They will offer their alliance soon, but they will test your vulnerability first. My vulnerability is the mortal world, Elias stated, tracing the map of Western Europe. Specifically the loose ends I left behind. His mind, sharpened by the elixir and the anchor, had been agonizing over Dr. Lena Sharma. She was the only one who knew of his disappearance and, more dangerously, the only one who might piece together the fragments of the supernatural world he had brushed against before his capture. Lena, Elias sighed, his voice heavy with a purely human regret. She is a tenacious scientist. She would never accept the simple explanation of a disappearance. She will be looking for me. And if she gets too close to the site of my capture, the Veil's temporal wards will fail. Serafina's expression remained perfectly serene. Temporal wards are insignificant. The problem is her knowledge. If she finds evidence, the mortal world's organizations, your governments, your hunters, will be alerted. We do not need a holy war during the consolidation phase. Then I must neutralize the threat, Elias said, the chilling practicality of the coven beginning to infect his soul. Neutralize means eliminate, Elias, Serafina stated, testing his resolve. Elias shook his head, looking up at his queen. No. Neutralize means control. I am the only one who can approach Lena without triggering a massive panic or alerting her to your true nature. I need to contact her. Bring her to the sanctum. Serafina's eyes flashed with curiosity. You wish to bring your old world into my new one? That is a profound risk, consort. It is a calculated one, Elias argued. Lena is rational. She is loyal to me. She needs proof. If I can show her the necessity of silence, the sheer scale of the power she is dealing with, she will comply. She stays out there investigating, she is a loose cannon. And here she is a controlled liability. Serafina considered this. It was a bold, risky gambit, but one that relied on the very human connection she struggled to understand. Very well, consort. You may contact her. But Lord Kale will oversee the entire operation. Should she pose the slightest risk, she will be handled permanently. Elias was given limited access to the mortal world through an ancient, magically shielded communication network. Using his specialized knowledge of museum security logs and academic research patterns, he found Lena. She answered his coded message immediately, the familiarity of her voice, full of frantic worry and relief, piercing the cold shell he had built around himself. Elias, where are you? The police, the agency, they think you vanished or worse. What happened? Lena's voice cracked over the secure line. Lena, listen carefully. I am safe. I am fine, Elias whispered, choosing his words with surgical precision. But I am in a situation you cannot imagine. You have to stop investigating the archive. Stop looking for me. Stop. Elias, you vanished into thin air. I found traces of blood and something else, something metallic and strange. What is going on? Are you being held? I am a guest, Lena. An important one. But you are in danger if you keep digging, Elias urged. I need you to come to me. I need to show you the truth so you can protect yourself and everyone else. There's a plane ticket waiting for you to an obscure town in Romania. Take it. No electronic devices. Just the clothes on your back. Trust me. There was a long pause on Lena's end, the sound of her rapid breathing amplified by his elixir hearing. The man I knew hated melodrama, Elias. If you're using codes and talking about obscure Romanian towns, this is not good. But if you're alive, I'm coming. You owe me the longest, most rational explanation in human history. The plan was set. Lena Sharma was coming to the Sanctum Vicos. Elias felt a profound conflict. He was about to expose his last link to morality to the raw, existential threat of his eternal world. He was saving her from the darkness by deliberately pulling her into its heart. Lord Kale watched him with cold, grudging respect. You play a dangerous game, consort. Emotions are liabilities. If she weeps for the man you were, she will die for the king you are. Emotions are also predictors, Kale, Elias countered, looking at the door that would soon bring his past into his present. And Lena Sharma, my friend, is predictable. She values logic above all else. I will give her a truth so vast and terrifying that her logic will compel her to silence. As they prepared for Lena's arrival, Elias felt Serafina's psychic presence settle around him, a cold, possessive curiosity. She was anticipating the arrival of her husband's last tether to his former life, eager to see how the rational king consort would handle the inevitable, emotional confrontation. The human variable was about to be introduced into the perfect, cold calculus of the immortal court. The arrival of Dr. Lena Sharma was handled with the same clinical precision Serafina applied to all military logistics. Lena was brought into the Sanctum Vicos under heavy magical concealment, blindfolded and heavily guarded by Lord Kale and his cohort. When the blindfold was removed in Elias's private receiving room, Lena blinked rapidly, her pragmatic, scientific eyes taking in the strange, opulent darkness of the ancient castle. Elias, what in God's name is this? Lena demanded, her voice shaking not with fear, but with overwhelming disbelief. She looked exactly as he remembered, sharp, focused, and utterly unprepared for the reality facing her. This is the truth, Lena, Elias said, his voice flat, devoid of the human warmth she remembered. He was standing regal and distant, wearing the silks of a king consort, the faint glow of the immortal anchor just visible beneath his cuff. The truth is you disappeared and I found traces of a massive cover-up, Lena retorted, stepping closer. Tell me you're not a cult leader or worse being held captive by one. I came here because I trusted your sanity. My sanity is sharper than ever, Elias countered. He moved quickly, pulling up the cuff of his shirt and exposing the faint, swirling mark of the witness, now permanently merged with Serafina's blood. What you are looking at is not a delusion, Lena. It is fact. It is history that never made it into the textbooks. He explained everything, speaking quickly, rationally, like a scientist presenting groundbreaking data. The existence of vampires, Serafina's royalty, the prophecy, the blood oath, Kale's challenge, and the recent victory against Volkov. He deliberately used scientific language, genetic markers, psychic energy transfer, temporal wards, and strategic resource allocation, to frame the mythology as a system. Lena listened in horrified silence, her initial anger slowly giving way to a devastating intellectual processing. She was a woman who valued evidence above all else. Elias was living evidence. Vampires, she whispered, shaking her head. And you are their consort. You married the queen. I secured an alliance necessary for my survival and the stability of the mortal world. Elias corrected her, his tone cold. Lena, the reason I brought you here is simple. Volkov's faction still exists. If you had succeeded in uncovering their history, you would have alerted organizations that would trigger a global conflict we cannot win yet. I controlled your liability by bringing you into the system. And what happens now? Lena asked, her voice tight. You expose me to an eternal war, sacrifice my entire career, and then what? Do I become your maid? Your captive? Before Elias could answer, the massive chamber doors opened and Serafina entered. She was flanked by Kale and 2 guards, her presence immediately filling the room with overwhelming power and cold beauty. Lena's pragmatic composure finally cracked. She visibly shrank, reacting instinctively to the sheer ancient dominance Serafina exuded. Serafina glided to the center of the room, her ruby eyes assessing Lena with chilling curiosity, like a scientist examining an interesting specimen. Dr. Sharma, Serafina's voice was velvet and ice. You represent the last human attachment of my consort. Elias has vouched for your intellect and your discretion. However, in my court, trust is earned through absolute necessity. Your Majesty, Lena managed, her professional training kicking in despite the terror. I am a scientist. I understand the concept of self-preservation. I want to know why this entire operation is necessary. Serafina smiled, directing a subtle, appreciative look at Elias for having chosen a human so focused on utility. My kingdom is fragmented, Serafina explained patiently. The Valerius faction, though weakened, seeks to trigger a holy war with your human world out of zealotry. If they succeed, your militaries will be overwhelmed, and their chaos will invite even darker things from beyond the veil. Elias, my consort, brings the unique knowledge necessary to stabilize my rule and maintain the global deception that keeps your world safe. The necessity is survival, Lena, Elias interrupted, emphasizing the political reality. If Serafina falls, chaos reigns and billions of lives are at risk. Your job now is to protect the deception. To be my eyes and ears in the human world without ever stepping foot back into it. Serafina stepped forward, her face becoming serious. You have 2 choices, Dr. Sharma. The first, I erase your memory of this event and you return to London, confused and forever missing the man you knew. You are safe but you remain a potential risk. She paused, letting the fear build. The second, you remain here in the sanctum as Elias's personal mortal intelligence anchor. You will live under my protection, safe from the external war, but you will work for Elias, using your human knowledge to manage and analyze the data he needs from the outside world. Your life is preserved. Your discretion is absolute. And you will never leave. Lena looked from the terrifying queen to the cold, powerful man Elias had become. She knew there was no returning to her old life. She was too close to the sun. She took a deep, shuddering breath. I choose to stay, Lena said, her voice shaking but firm. I choose the role. I accept the necessity. But you will never erase what you did to Elias. Serafina laughed, a beautiful, chilling sound. Excellent. Elias, your human liability is now a functional asset. Lord Kale will show Dr. Sharma to her quarters. She is under the veil's protection, and her communication with the outside world will be limited only to what you deem strategically necessary. As Lena was led away by the silent, glowering Kale, she cast one last desperate look at Elias, a look that held grief, accusation, and a sliver of terrifying respect for the monster he had become. Elias walked to Serafina, who was now examining a map, the small drama already dismissed. You handled that with cold perfection, consort, she said. It was difficult, Elias admitted, feeling a cold ache in his human heart. The only part of him the anchor hadn't entirely frozen. Difficulty is the forge of power, Serafina replied, placing a cold hand on his shoulder. Your past is now contained. We can focus on the future. The Obsidian clan sends its diplomat tonight. Now, tell me, how should we use your new mortal intelligence anchor to prepare for this alliance? Elias, the former historian, now the architect of his captor's eternal future, looked at the map. The ache in his heart was still there, but it was being drowned out by the thrilling, intoxicating hum of global strategy. We will use Lena to create a plausible public record of my death, Elias stated, his voice returning to the chilling precision of the consort. And simultaneously, we will have her monitor the human world's response to the Valerius's sudden implosion. We need to measure the ripple effect. His human past was gone. His eternal reign had begun. The chamber assigned to Dr. Lena Sharma was luxurious but felt clinical, secured by vampire wards and constantly monitored by Kale's peripheral guards. Elias found her seated at a massive desk, already organizing the outdated computer equipment Kale had reluctantly procured from the mortal world. Lena's face was drawn, yet her eyes held the fierce concentration of a scientist presented with an impossible data set. The police confirmed your disappearance as a missing person case last week, Lena stated, not looking up. I fed them a trail leading to a fraudulent shell company in Malta. It closes the file without raising high-level flags. Perfect, Lena, Elias replied, a surge of professional pride mixing with the cold reality of their situation. Now for your first active assignment. The Obsidian Clan. Elias explained that the Obsidian Clan were mercenaries, the neutral power in the immortal world who valued pragmatism and strength above bloodlines. Their diplomat was arriving that night to gauge Serafina's stability after the Volkov incident. Their loyalty is for sale, but only to the dominant party, Elias said, leaning on the desk. They will try to destabilize the Queen by questioning the weakest link. Me. They want to know if my human insight is worth the risk of blending mortal knowledge with eternal power. And you want me to find their weakness, Lena deduced. No, Elias corrected, his voice adopting the chilling tone of the consort. I want you to provide leverage. The Obsidian Clan operates on the principle of self-interest. They won't care about our politics. They care about their financial security and their ability to stay hidden. I need you to use your human world access to find a non-vampiric vulnerability. Elias handed her a list of 3 cryptic names, known Obsidian Clan mortal aliases that only Serafina's ancient records possessed. Find their primary financial holdings, their key infrastructure links in the mortal world, and most importantly, any public information that, if exposed, could threaten their secrecy. Lena's fingers flew across the keyboard. You're asking me to commit industrial espionage on an immortal power structure. You are my mortal intelligence anchor, Lena. This is your function, Elias stated, stepping back. We need something to hold over their diplomat, something that proves to the Obsidian Clan that working with us offers protection against mortal threats only we can identify. Elias left her to the silence of her work, the tension between his past and present self palpable. He knew he was asking his best friend to compromise every moral boundary she held, yet it was the only way to keep her alive and functional in this new world. Later that evening, Elias stood beside Serafina in the Grand Council Hall. The atmosphere was dramatically different from the Volkov confrontation. Instead of hostility, there was tense, calculating respect. Lord Kale stood at rigid attention behind Elias, a force symbol of loyalty. The Obsidian Clan's diplomat, a creature named Vex, arrived. Vex was not ornate like Serafina or militaristic like Kale. He was slender, deceptively modern, and wore a perfectly tailored suit. His power was quiet, insidious, radiating an unnerving competence. Queen Serafina, Vex began, his voice dry and neutral. The clan appreciates the swiftness with which you addressed the instability of Volkov. Now we must address the consort of the witness's mark. Vex's golden eyes, cold and assessing, settled on Elias. The introduction of a mortal element into the core of the Crimson Veil is unprecedented. The risk to our own temporal integrity is immense. How can a fragile, short-lived human provide meaningful stability to an eternal domain? Serafina opened her mouth to speak, but Elias placed a hand lightly on her arm, a silent signal that the consort would handle the challenge. Vex, Elias began, his voice calm and precise. Your clan seeks alliances with the strong. My value is not in my lifespan but in my vision. You see this court, this castle. I see the world of instantaneous communication, satellite surveillance, and digital footprints that could unravel your entire millennia of secrecy in a single afternoon. Vex raised a skeptical eyebrow. Mortal distractions are beneath our notice, consort. Are they? Elias challenged, pulling a small, thin datapad from his silk tunic. This was the information Lena had just secured. He activated the datapad, displaying a complex web of financial transactions and shell companies. This is the Orion Holdings Group, Elias explained, pointing to a key figure on the screen. Your primary source of mortal capital. Last week, Orion Holdings successfully acquired the mining rights to the Silver Vein in the Carpathian Mountains, a location vital to your clan's primary mystical wards. Vex's composure finally broke. His face went pale, his eyes flashing with surprise. The acquisition had been highly secretive. "What is your point, consort?" Vex hissed. "My point is that the acquisition was executed via a digital backdoor left open by an amateur mortal hacker. A weakness that your ancient system failed to detect," Elias continued, his voice relentless. "My mortal intelligence anchor detected this vulnerability and in the last hour has secured the leverage. We now possess the key codes to fully dismantle Orion Holdings and expose your clan's mortal infrastructure to every major intelligence agency simultaneously." A ripple of fear and shock ran through the Obsidian clan delegation. The threat was not magic but exposure, the one thing the reclusive clan feared more than death. Elias closed the datapad, meeting Vex's cold gaze. "The Crimson Veil, unified under Seraphina, offers you more than protection from other vampires. We offer protection from the future. We offer the only path to maintain your secrecy against the encroaching modern world. You show us a great threat, consort," Vex whispered, his eyes narrowing. "But you do not offer a solution." "The solution is alliance," Seraphina stated, stepping forward, her hand resting heavily on Elias's shoulder in a clear display of shared power. "We protect your secret holdings from mortal threats, and you lend your strength to our consolidation. You accept the reality. The only way to survive the 21st century is with a king consort who understands the 21st century." Vex assessed the scene: the powerful queen, the coldly rational human king consort, and the humiliated but obedient Lord Kale. Elias had not just survived the test, he had used it to demonstrate a capability no other vampire court possessed. "The Obsidian clan accepts your proposition, Queen Seraphina," Vex announced, bowing low. "We will provide military support and intelligence." The coven was now fully unified, its foundation cemented by the brilliant, ruthless mind of its human king consort. Later, Seraphina stood with Elias, looking out over the silent, shadowed castle grounds. "You are magnificent, Elias," she said, her voice filled with a cold, possessive pride. "You turned a threat into an asset, and you secured the most powerful alliance with mere data. You are proving yourself worthy of eternity." Elias felt no triumph, only a deep, cold satisfaction. "I did what was necessary to secure my position and yours. Now we must secure the consolidation." While Elias was being bound further to Seraphina's destiny, Dr. Lena Sharma was proving to be an invaluable asset. Using her deep connections to the academic world and complex digital ghost accounts, she provided Elias with a steady stream of vital data from the mortal world. One evening, Lena intercepted a communication that broke through her usual scientific detachment. She immediately requested an urgent, secure meeting with Elias. "It's not about the Obsidian clan's finances this time," Lena said, her voice tight with panic when they met in her secured chamber. She handed Elias a printout of an obscure military intelligence report. "This is from a deep-cover NATO intelligence report, flagged through my old counterterrorism contact," Lena explained, pointing to a cryptic entry. The report mentions a sudden, highly organized outbreak of untraceable biosignatures in Eastern Europe, precisely where Volkov's Valerius Coven used to hold territory. Elias scanned the report, his enhanced mind instantly connecting the dots. "Biosignatures? Untraceable?" "Yes," Lena confirmed grimly. "They're describing highly efficient, nocturnal attacks targeting small, specific military outposts and energy hubs. The patterns suggest deliberate sabotage, not random terror. And the human casualties show a massive, almost instant depletion of vital fluids. They are calling it the Shadow Plague." Elias felt a surge of cold dread. Volkov is contained. The Valerius Coven is fractured. This isn't their work. This is too coordinated, too clean. He looked at the map Lena had generated, showing the attack locations. They were systematically moving toward the unprotected rural borders of the Vale's territory. "It's the Noctis Coven," Elias deduced, naming the third, fragmented vampire house. "They are not political, they are territorial and driven by raw power. They see the chaos from the Volkov incident and Seraphina's focus on the air, and they are launching a hostile takeover of the fragmented Valerius lands. But they are using mortals," Lena insisted, tapping the biosignature section. "The military reports point to human agents, highly efficient, almost automated. They move like soldiers but they feed like new, unstable vampires," Elias finished, his voice low. "The Noctis Coven is not following the old rules. They are creating shock troops, instantly turned mortals, disposable and driven by pure, uninhibited hunger. They are using them as a screening force to destabilize the region before their main forces move in. This was a catastrophic new threat. The traditional vampire houses fought with ancient rules of honor and magic. Noctis was using modern bioterror tactics. "There is one final crucial element to our unification," Serafina murmured, turning to him, her ruby eyes blazing with a potent blend of desire and command. "The prophecy speaks of cementing the dynasty. It requires an heir. A child of the veil and the mark." The sudden realization hit Elias with the force of a physical blow. Their eternal alliance was not complete with the political marriage. It required an immortal heir, the ultimate binding of his human soul to her eternal purpose. Elias, the man who valued logic and calculation above all else, realized the final, irrevocable step of his destiny was about to begin. The necessity of an immortal heir hung heavy in the air, a silent, unspoken demand that superseded political alliance and tactical planning. Serafina approached the concept with the same cold, strategic focus she applied to all matters of dynasty. It was not a matter of mortal affection, but of genetic imperative, the final, irreversible blend of the ancient vampire lineage with the protective, stabilizing power of the witness's mark. Elias, despite the chilling control he now exerted over his emotions, felt the weight of this new demand. He was a creature of logic, yet the creation of a child, even an immortal one, was an act of profound, frightening consequence. The union must be completed swiftly, Serafina informed him one night in the Queen's private solar, an intimidating room carved entirely from white marble. The Obsidian clan's alliance is a temporary fix. True, unassailable power comes only when the heir is conceived, fulfilling the final clause of the prophecy. "And what happens to the child?" Elias asked, trying to maintain his professional detachment. "Is it human? Vampire? Something else?" Serafina moved toward him, her ruby eyes gleaming with the anticipation of power. "The child will be the apex of the veil. Neither fully mortal nor fully pure blood. It will inherit my strength and your resistance. Will be the perfect ruler." Their intimacy became a matter of strategic partnership, cold, deliberate, and fiercely possessive. Serafina treated Elias as the key to her eternal legacy, her touch a mix of demanding ownership and calculated respect for his power. Elias found himself responding not with love, but with a terrifying, addictive surrender to her ancient dominance, a recognition that this dangerous woman was the sole architect of his new, powerful existence. The human soul in him was receding, replaced by the relentless, cold ambition of the king consort. Elias immediately took the findings to Serafina, who was preparing for the final phase of the heir ritual. "My queen," Elias stated, laying the mortal intelligence report on her ancient desk. "The Noctis Coven is on the move. They are not challenging the Veil's border. They are challenging the very principle of the Veil, using human pawns to wage disposable warfare." Serafina read the report, her ruby eyes blazing with cold fury. "Disposable shock troops? This vulgarity is beneath contempt. They seek to taint the entire immortal world with their weakness. They seek to conquer," Elias corrected. "And they are dangerously efficient. If they breach the borders, the ensuing violence will be so raw, so uncontrolled, that the human world will be forced to acknowledge the existence of the supernatural. The global deception will collapse." Serafina looked at Elias, her strategic focus returning instantly. The heir was crucial, but the collapse of the Veil was existential. "We must strike first," Serafina declared. "We will not wait for them to reach our borders. The Noctis leader, Darius, must be eliminated, and his forces scattered before their shadow plague spreads further. Kale and the main guard are necessary for the sanctum's defense during the heir ritual," Elias cautioned. "You cannot lead the entire assault." Serafina gave him a chilling smile, her gaze filled with a cold, absolute trust. "I have no need to lead the entire assault, consort. I only need to remove the head. You will accompany me. Your immortal anchor is proof against their crude magic, and your mind is necessary to track the human intelligence they are exploiting." Elias realized his fate was sealed. The king consort was no longer just a planner. He was a warrior, bound to the queen's side in the inevitable, deadly conflicts of the eternal world. He was trading the safety of his logic for the terrifying reality of his power. The assault on the Noctis Coven's forward operating base was not a grand military campaign but a surgical strike, executed under the cover of a freezing, wind-whipped night. Serafina and Elias traveled alone, eschewing the massive, slow vampire guard in favor of speed and absolute silence. Lord Kale remained at the sanctum, his presence vital for protecting the heir ritual space and overseeing Lena's intelligence stream. Elias was armed only with the ceremonial dagger, now less a symbol and more a weapon, and his heightened intellect. The immortal anchor coursing through his veins gave him a subtle edge, faster reflexes, enhanced resilience against cold, and the terrifying psychic link to Serafina that allowed them to coordinate without a word. The Noctis base was situated in an abandoned, Soviet-era communications tower complex deep in the Carpathian Mountains, a location that provided both isolation and crucial access to mortal communication lines. Serafina immediately disabled the visible guard posts, using her ancient magic to freeze the minds of the lower-tier vampires patrolling the perimeter. "The greatest threat is the human element, Elias," Serafina whispered, her voice a cold rasp in the night air. "The shock troops. Their actions are unpredictable, driven by pure, unbound hunger, not loyalty. They breached the main communication hub, a massive echoing chamber filled with humming servers and the stench of stale blood. The scene inside was chaos. A dozen newly turned shock troops, mortals in tattered military uniforms, their eyes wide and vacant, their movements jerky and unnatural, were busy feeding from a cluster of captured engineers. Their objective is data extraction, not just sustenance, Elias observed, quickly scanning the room. They are looking for schematics, access codes, anything that leads to massive infrastructure failure. Darius is trying to collapse the mortal world systems. Serafina moved first, a blur of dark velvet. She was lethal, not with brute force but with debilitating speed. She moved through the shock troops like a razor wind, snapping necks and severing spines with horrifying efficiency. But as soon as one fell, another, sensing the feast, would lung wildly. Elias was forced into action. He was fast but not immortal. A shock troop, its face smeared with blood, charged him. Elias sidestepped, utilizing his enhanced reflexes, and plunged his dagger into the creature's heart. A mortal kill that stopped the unstable vampire instantly. "The density is too high. They will overwhelm us," Elias shouted, parrying a flailing blow. "Find Darius. He is the nexus of this vulgarity," Serafina commanded, locked in a brutal dance with three of the frenzied new creatures. Elias sprinted past the carnage, following the loudest, most complex sound signature his anchor could detect. A rapid, confident monologue coming from the main control room. He burst into the room. Sitting at the head of a massive control panel, wearing modern, tailored fatigues, was Darius, the Noctis leader. Darius was not ancient. He was young, charismatic, and terrifyingly efficient. The famed king consort, Darius sneered, a predatory smile splitting his face. "A human leash on the great queen. I admire the strategy but I despise the weakness." Darius snapped his fingers. Two more shock troops, seemingly immune to the chaos outside, charged Elias. Elias knew he couldn't fight two more in a confined space. Serafina has been injured by the sun and has the immortal anchor to counter it. "You are a genius, consort. But you are predictable," Darius mocked, pulling out a remote device. "I have something that neither your anchor nor your queen can counter." Darius pressed a button. Suddenly, the entire complex was flooded not with sunlight, but with high-frequency sonic waves, a mortal weapon designed for crowd control, but amplified to an agonizing degree. The sound instantly paralyzed Elias. His hyper-hearing, his greatest asset, became his greatest vulnerability. The noise was a physical sledgehammer, crippling his mind and body. The shock troops, whose newly turned bodies registered the pain differently, closed in for the kill. Just as the creatures reached him, the door burst open. Serafina, though visibly reeling from the debilitating sonic attack, unleashed a wave of raw, psychic energy. The force didn't physically harm Darius, but it ripped through the control panel, overloading the sonic device. The silence that followed was deafening and agonizingly welcome. "You use mortal tricks," Darius, Serafina spat, slowly recovering. "You betray our nature. I evolve, Serafina. You cling to archaic power and ancient prophecy. Your human consort proved to me that mortal technology is the superior weapon." Darius roared, suddenly vanishing with blinding speed, reappearing behind Serafina with a long obsidian blade aimed at her spine. Serafina was slightly too slow, still recovering from the sonic blast. Elias, despite his throbbing, ruined senses, saw the attack coming through their psychic link. He acted on pure instinct, fueled by the anchor. He launched himself at Serafina, tackling her aside just as Darius's blade slashed through the empty air where her heart had been. The force of the attack was devastating. Elias cried out as the obsidian blade, sharp and magically charged, sliced a deep gash across his shoulder. The anchor protected him from a fatal wound, but the agony was blinding. Serafina, now fully alert and fueled by fury, moved faster than sight. She engaged Darius in a furious, silent close combat battle, a blur of ancient rage against modern cunning. Darius was fast but Serafina was eternal. As they fought, Elias, bleeding heavily, saw his opportunity. He knew that the modern, mortal systems were Darius's only true weakness. The main communication hub was now showing a critical system overload, the remnant of Serafina's psychic blast. Ignoring the searing pain in his shoulder, Elias dragged himself to the main power nexus, a massive humming energy conduit. He didn't have the strength to fight, but he had the cold calculus to disable. Using the ceremonial dagger, he jammed the obsidian blade deep into the nexus, completing the circuit. The entire control panel erupted in a massive, blinding surge of electrical feedback. Darius, caught in the proximity of the overload, screamed as his body was violently ripped backward by the rogue energy. The blow was mortal, the vampire equivalent of a clean, instantaneous electrocution, delivered by the very mortal technology he had sought to exploit. Serafina stood over Darius's smoking remains, her chest heaving, the silk of her gown barely ruffled. She looked at Elias, who was slumped against the wall, clutching his bleeding shoulder. "You saved my life, Elias," she whispered, her voice heavy with the weight of the moment. "You risked your mortality for my eternity." "I secured the dynasty, my queen," Elias corrected, forcing himself to his feet. The wound was already beginning to close, the anchor doing its terrifying, miraculous work. "The threat is neutralized. Now we go home. We have an heir to conceive." They left the ruined complex, the final act of violence confirming their partnership. Elias, the rational historian, was now a hardened warrior, bound by blood, strategy, and survival to the terrifying queen he had promised to marry. He was no longer just the consort. He was her protector, forged in fire and data. The return to the Sanctum Vicos was not a journey of rest, but of accelerated recovery and renewed purpose. Elias's shoulder wound, a deep, jagged slice from Darius's obsidian blade, had closed almost entirely during the silent flight back. The immortal anchor was doing its work, stitching muscle and mending nerve endings with terrifying, non-human speed. The pain, however, lingered, a dull, constant ache that served as a physical reminder of his near-fatal brush with death, and the absolute necessity of Serafina's survival. Serafina led him directly to her private healing chamber, a space infused with ancient, restorative magic. She did not call for servants or healers, she attended to him herself. Her touch was cold and possessive as she applied a viscous, dark unguent to the remaining scar tissue. "The anchor protects, Elias, but it does not make you immune to shock," she murmured, her ruby eyes intense. "You fought with the recklessness of a mortal but the strategy of a king. You proved that your human life is a worthwhile sacrifice." "It was self-preservation," Elias corrected, watching the last of the wound seal. "If you fell, the coven would collapse and my existence would be meaningless." Serafina smiled, a rare, chillingly satisfied expression. Such cold logic in the face of death. "This is why our union is inevitable." The intensity of their relationship grew exponentially after the battle. It was cemented by shared blood, shared danger, and the shared, single focus on the immortal heir. Serafina treated the impending conception as the most critical strategic maneuver of her eternal life. Their intimacy was a ritual of power, a deliberate, cold exploration of their bound souls, where the line between desire and dynastic duty blurred into a single, overwhelming necessity. While Elias was being prepared for the final ritual, the external world was reacting violently to the Noctis incident. He immediately sought out Dr. Lena Sharma. He found her in her chamber, surrounded by screens displaying complex military and financial data. "The Noctis base is silent," Lena reported, her eyes red from lack of sleep but focused. "The attack was a clean sweep. The world thinks it was a high-level counterterrorism operation gone wrong. But the data shows something else." Lena highlighted a cluster of secure financial transactions, small, untraceable deposits flowing from multiple anonymous mortal foundations into a very specific, obscure Eastern European paramilitary group. "The money is moving into a group called the Order of the Silver Blade," Lena stated, her voice tight with professional alarm. "They're not affiliated with any known intelligence agency. They are highly trained, move in tight military formations, and their stated goal, publicly, is to eliminate unnatural threats, coded language but obvious to anyone who knows our world now." Elias's enhanced mind processed the information instantly. "They are hunters. Not official government forces, but a private, highly funded paramilitary dedicated to our eradication. Volkov and Darius must have used mortal fronts to fund them as a last resort. They are already active," Lena continued, pulling up satellite images showing a large, heavily camouflaged facility being established near the Carpathian Mountains, closer to the Sanctum than the Noctis base had ever been. "They are utilizing counter-vampire technology that is highly advanced, far beyond anything a fragmented coven could have developed. They are using silver-infused weaponry, consecrated explosives, and most critically, they are developing UV pulse generators." The mention of UV pulse generators, Devices capable of generating short, concentrated bursts of lethal ultraviolet light sent a spike of cold dread through Elias. Seraphina's powers would shield her from extended daylight, but a concentrated UV pulse could kill her instantly. This is not a political challenge, Elias, Lena warned, looking him straight in the eye. This is an existential threat. They are coming for Seraphina, and they are using human methods that your anchor cannot entirely deflect. Elias took the threat directly to Seraphina, who was, frustratingly, solely focused on the ancient requirements of the air ritual. Lord Kale was in the room, overseeing the ceremonial preparation, his face a mask of silent disdain. The Order of the Silver Blade is mobilizing, my queen, Elias stated, presenting Lena's evidence. They are not creatures of myth. They are human soldiers with lethal modern technology. We must delay the air ritual and mobilize the Obsidian clan for a defensive strike. We will not delay the prophecy for mortal insects, consort, Seraphina countered, her voice absolute. The unification is meaningless without the air. The Obsidian clan is loyal to power, not to me. We must secure the dynasty first. As Seraphina turned away to consult a ritual master, Kale moved to Elias's side, his voice a low, gravelly whisper only Elias's anchor could discern over the ritual chanting. She is blinded by the prophecy's last demand, consort, Kale admitted, a flicker of cold respect in his golden eyes. She believes the heir's birth will magically solve all external threats. But you must understand the true cost. Elias looked at the grim-faced Lord Kale. What is the true cost? The immortal anchor, Kale explained, his voice laced with foreboding. The consummation ceremony transferred half of Seraphina's anchor to your soul. The final ritual, the conception of the apex heir, will transfer the remainder of her anchor to the child. Elias felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. Meaning? Meaning that while the heir is powerful, the queen will be temporarily vulnerable. Her eternal life force split between two entities, Kale stated flatly. And you, consort, will possess the power of the mark, but no longer the physical protection of the anchor. You will be fully mortal again, facing an eternal threat, right as the Order of the Silver Blade strikes. The realization was a devastating, cold shock. The final act of their union was not just about securing the dynasty, it was Seraphina's greatest sacrifice, making both her and Elias utterly vulnerable to the precise, deadly threat Lena had just identified. Seraphina knows this? Elias asked, his voice barely a breath. It is the necessary price of the prophecy, Kale replied. She relies on your mortal mind to secure the perimeter before that time. Now, consort, the choice is yours. Protect the queen before you lose your defense or proceed with the ritual and risk everything. Elias looked at Seraphina, magnificent and terrifying, utterly focused on her destiny. He was now her protector, bound by the terrible knowledge that the final moment of her triumph would be their greatest shared peril. He had to use Lena's intelligence to neutralize the silver blade before the final binding ritual stripped him of his only physical defense. The revelation of the immortal anchor's ultimate transfer, leaving both the queen and the consort vulnerable at the moment of dynastic triumph, galvanized Elias into a flurry of cold, desperate strategy. He was racing against the prophecy itself. If the ritual proceeded before the silver blade was neutralized, the ancient enemy would strike at the sanctum's weakest point, and neither Seraphina nor Elias would possess the protective resilience to survive the modern, consecrated threat. Elias called an immediate high-security strategy meeting in Lena's chamber, the only room where mortal technology and vampire magic coexisted and where the true threat could be analyzed without Seraphina's interference. Lord Kale stood by the door, a silent, disapproving yet obedient sentinel. The Order of the Silver Blade is not a political coven. They are a military cell, Elias stated, tapping the screen where Lena displayed the UV pulse generator blueprints. They won't negotiate. They will assault the sanctum directly, using the UV pulse to paralyze Seraphina and the others, then move in with silver-infused weapons. Their base is a heavily fortified structure in the mountains, Lena pointed out, tracing a route on the topographic map. It's too deep for a frontal assault before the ritual. We need to disable their primary weapon, the UV pulse generators, before they can deploy them. We need a localized, internal sabotage, Elias concluded. He looked at Kale. Lord Kale, your knowledge of the mountain tunnels surrounding the sanctum is absolute. Is there an ancient, forgotten ingress point near the Silver Blade's base? Kale, after a moment of tense silence, conceded the point. There is a subterranean river system. It was sealed off centuries ago by my ancestors to prevent infiltration from the Valerius. It leads directly beneath their position, but the current is deadly, and the seals are magically protected. The seals are protected against vampire magic, Elias deduced, a cold, dangerous thought taking shape. They wouldn't protect against mortal technology. Elias looked at Lena, his gaze intense. Lena, I need a high-power, low-profile thermite device. Enough to melt through the ancient seal without collapsing the entire tunnel. I need it small and I need it now. Lena, though pale, nodded. I can synthesize the components from the Sanctum's obscure chemical stores. It will take 2 hours. The plan that Elias devised was terrifyingly simple, relying entirely on the unique, ephemeral power of the mark and the reluctant obedience of Lord Kale. Kale, you and a small contingent of your most loyal guards will approach the base via the river tunnel after the thermite breach, Elias instructed. You will not engage. Your task is to plant magically shielded flares around the perimeter. These flares will emit a faint, localized pulse of Valerius Coven magic. Kale frowned. Why Valerius magic? They are already broken. Because the Silver Blade is primarily funded by remnants of the Valerius and Noctis, Elias explained, his logic ruthless. When the flares ignite, their mortal surveillance will read it as an internal vampire conflict. Valerius forces attacking Noctis remnants. They will see their own benefactors fighting. They will assume the vampires are destroying themselves and delay the immediate launch of the UV pulse, buying Seraphina the crucial time she needs. And you, consort? Kale asked, his golden eyes narrowed with suspicion. I will be the distraction, Elias said, his voice flat. I will be the final step. I will be the one who physically neutralizes the UV generator's source. The time for the final ritual, the conception of the immortal heir, was fast approaching. Seraphina was deep in meditation, preparing her soul for the profound, life-altering transfer of the anchor. Elias knew he had only hours. Lena worked with frantic, surgical precision, synthesizing the powerful thermite in her secure chamber. Kale, though furious at the deception and the risk, mobilized 3 of his most trusted guards. Before leaving, Elias stood before Seraphina's meditation chamber. She sensed his presence and opened her eyes, which were filled with a profound, terrifying calm. You are worried, consort, she stated, not as a question but as a fact. I am calculating the risk, Elias corrected. The Silver Blade is mobilizing. Their timing is too precise. I believe they will strike at the moment the final ritual begins. Seraphina rose, moving to him with impossible grace. She placed her hands on his chest, right over his heart, her eyes burning. Then we move the ritual forward, Elias. It will begin in 1 hour. We will not be governed by the whims of mortals. But Kale says. Kale speaks of fragmented knowledge and old fears, Seraphina cut him off, her voice absolute. The prophecy must be fulfilled. I need the heir to stabilize the veil. And I need you, Elias, bound to me for all eternity before I face any further threat. Now go. Do what you must to distract the mortals. I will prepare for our destiny. Elias realized that his tactical mind and his life meant nothing compared to Seraphina's ancient dynastic focus. She had deliberately chosen the moment of her greatest vulnerability, trusting Elias's mortal plan to save her. Elias met Kale in the dark tunnels beneath the sanctum. Lena handed Elias the small, heavy thermite charge, her face pale but resolute. Elias, don't forget who you were, Lena whispered desperately. Don't let the power consume you. The man I was is the only thing that can save the world. The man I am now rules, Elias replied, the cold logic absolute. Kale led them through the cold, twisting tunnels. They reached the ancient seal, a massive iron-reinforced slab of rock fused with anti-vampire magic. Elias affixed the thermite. The resulting explosion was silent, controlled, and intensely hot, melting a precise hole through the seal. Kale and his guards vanished into the subterranean river system, heading toward the Silver Blade base. Elias returned to the sanctum. The ritual had begun. Seraphina was standing on the ceremonial dais, bathed in the faint, crimson light of the magical field. The atmosphere was charged, and the remaining immortal anchor was visibly coalescing into a shimmering light around her heart. As the ritual peaked, a siren suddenly wailed through the ancient castle, a mortal alarm Seraphina's own wards had tripped. The Silver Blade. Kale's frantic voice pierced the psychic link. They saw the tunnel breach. They are on the surface. The UV pulse is deploying. Seraphina flinched, her concentration broken by the imminent threat. The powerful anchor left her body, splitting into 2 distinct streams. One pure and ethereal, moving toward the invisible, gestating air. The other, thin and fragmented, receding from Elias's soul, leaving him suddenly cold, human, and terrifyingly vulnerable. The anchor is gone. Seraphina cried out, her voice filled with sudden weakness. Elias felt the immense psychic force of the anchor vanish from his veins. He was just Elias Vance, the historian, standing in the heart of an immortal conflict, facing a modern threat he could no longer deflect. Outside, the first UV pulse generator ignited, casting an intense, lethal light through the high narrow windows of the hall. The light struck Serafina. She screamed, not from fear, but from the searing, agonizing pain of concentrated sunlight burning her eternal soul. Elias had failed to buy enough time. The silver blade had struck. The sudden return to pure mortality was a devastating physical and psychic shock. Elias Vance felt the cold, familiar terror of being merely flesh and bone, his enhanced senses dulled, the blinding pain from the UV pulse generator's reflection searing his unprotected skin. Serafina was screaming, the searing light from the narrow windows causing immediate agonizing damage to her ancient form. The transfer of the immortal anchor to the nascent heir was complete, leaving the queen temporarily weakened and exposed. Elias, the light, the window. Serafina choked out, collapsing onto the dais, her velvet gown smoking faintly where the concentrated UV rays touched her. Elias acted not as a consort, but as the sharp, rational commander he had become. He dragged himself across the cold stone floor, ignoring the pain. He reached the heavy, ornamental draperies and using the last of his adrenaline, ripped them from the wall, plunging the central dais into temporary darkness. The immediate relief allowed Serafina to gasp and clutch her burned skin, her power slowly reasserting itself against the trauma. Kill. Elias yelled into the psychic link, which still existed, though severely weakened without the anchor's boost. Status report. The main attack is in the Hall of Whispers. They will be coming down the main corridor. From the mental link, Kale's response was a wave of pure, cold fury mixed with pain. The flares worked, consort. They sent an advanced team, soldiers of the Silver Blade, consecrated. They are too fast. They are already inside the sanctum. But the larger force is still debating the internal vampire conflict ruse. Elias realized Kale's ploy had bought them precious minutes, but the Silver Blade's advanced team, the most lethal, consecrated hunters, were inside. Elias sprinted back to Lena's chamber, his every breath burning. He found Lena frantically monitoring the sanctum's internal security feeds, her face pale with terror. Lena, the UV pulse generators, Elias demanded, pointing to the screen showing the sanctum's exterior defenses. They are set up on the north and west towers. They must be destroyed or Serafina dies. They are heavily shielded. Lena cried. We can't hit them externally without massive explosions that will collapse the castle. Internal sabotage then. Elias decided. I need you to open the internal maintenance access to the North Tower. Give me the schematics. I'm going in. Elias, no. You're fully human. They have silver weapons. You won't make it to the tower. Lena pleaded, seeing the stark madness of his proposal. I have no choice, Lena. Kale is pinned down by the advanced team, Elias said, already stripping off the silk outer robe. He grabbed the ceremonial dagger and tucked it into his belt. I have the knowledge they don't. That is my only weapon now. He grabbed a headset Lena had used for communication. Kale, I'm heading to the North Tower. Keep the advanced team occupied for exactly 4 minutes. I need the corridor clear. Kale's voice, strained by battle, came back through the link. You're a fool, consort. But I obey the oath. Elias moved through the ancient corridors, no longer relying on speed, but on his superior knowledge of the castle's forgotten layout. He avoided the main corridors where the clatter of Silver Blade armor echoed, instead using dusty low-ceilinged servant tunnels he had mapped during his initial captivity. He reached the base of the North Tower maintenance access. Lena, guiding him remotely, had opened the heavy security door. Elias, you have 3 minutes before Kale's team falls back, Lena's voice hissed urgently in his ear. The generator is on the roof platform. The power core is located in the middle housing. It's protected by a silver mesh. Elias began the ascent, the narrow, winding stairs amplifying the pain in his chest. He heard heavy, rhythmic footsteps above. The Silver Blade guards were patrolling the roof. He reached the final hatch. He pushed it open and rolled out onto the roof just as 2 Silver Blade soldiers, clad in black, lightweight combat gear and wielding long, silver-tipped spears, rounded the corner. They stopped, genuinely surprised to see a man in black ceremonial clothes, holding a small dagger instead of a vampire. The human consort. One soldier shouted, his voice muffled by his mask. Capture him. He's the key. Elias didn't wait for them to close the distance. He didn't fight. He distracted. He threw the ceremonial dagger, a worthless weapon against silver armor, directly at the UV pulse generator's housing unit. The dagger clanged loudly, hitting the metal. The 2 soldiers, trained to protect the weapon above all else, reflexively turned toward the generator. Elias seized the split second of distraction. He grabbed a heavy metal crowbar left by a long-dead maintenance worker. As the first soldier turned back, Elias swung the crowbar low and hard, not at the armored chest, but at the soldier's exposed knee joint, relying on physics, not magic. The soldier screamed as the joint buckled. The second soldier lunged, spear raised. Elias dropped the crowbar and used his historian's agility, the quickness needed to dodge collapsing museum shelves, to duck under the spear and into the generator's housing unit. Lena. The core. Elias gasped, clutching the silver mesh barrier that protected the massive humming UV core. You need to disrupt the cooling system. It's the small red line directly beneath the power valve. Lena directed, her voice trembling but steady. The silver mesh burned his hands, but he ignored the searing pain. The soldier who had been struck was struggling to rise, dragging his damaged leg. Elias grabbed the small silver-tipped dagger he had thrown earlier and, with absolute precision, plunged it into the soft, unprotected coolant line. A blast of superheated steam erupted. The entire UV pulse generator began to whine, its sophisticated systems destabilizing rapidly. Elias, get out, Lena screamed. Elias scrambled back as the machine violently overloaded. The UV core, unable to manage the heat, detonated in a brilliant, violent burst of electrical fire and steam, effectively destroying the North Tower generator. The blast stunned the remaining Silver Blade soldiers. Elias, singed, deafened, and battered, stumbled back towards the maintenance hatch. Elias returned to the Hall of Whispers just as the central crisis was reaching its peak. Lord Kale and his surviving guards, battered and bleeding, had driven the last of the Silver Blade advance team back to the main entrance. Serafina, though weakened and scarred by the sunlight, was on her feet, radiating terrible, cold power. The North Tower is disabled, Elias announced, his voice raw, collapsing onto one knee before the Queen. The second generator is still active on the West Tower. Serafina looked at the burnt, exhausted mortal before her. A man who had just saved her eternal life using only his intelligence and courage. The fear in her eyes was replaced by a profound, cold reverence. You are a king, Elias Vance, she declared, her voice ringing with finality. It was then, in that moment of absolute, desperate triumph, that the final part of the prophecy manifested. A sound, faint yet powerful, echoed through the vast, cold hall, the cry of an infant. The immortal heir had been born. Serafina smiled, a chilling expression of complete victory. It is done. The dynasty is secured. The remaining Silver Blade forces outside, seeing the flash of light and hearing the powerful, unnatural cry of the heir, hesitated. Their confidence was shattered. Their UV weapon was destroyed, and their ultimate target had just cemented her eternal dynasty. Lord Kale, exhausted but victorious, looked at the fallen king consort, the scarred queen, and the powerful new life. They will retreat, my queen. They know they have failed. Serafina knelt beside Elias, her cold hand touching his burned cheek. The price was high, my consort. But we are eternal now. Elias looked at the queen, the beautiful monster who had given him power, taken his humanity, and now depended entirely on his mortal insight. He had survived the inevitable conflict. He was the king consort, fully human, bound by blood, strategy, and the terrifying, cold realization that his life was now an eternal commitment to warfare on behalf of the woman who ruled the night. He had promised her she would make a perfect wife. The vampire queen had kept her word, making him her perfect, permanent weapon.